Here is a number worth sitting with for a moment. Nearly 1 in every 7 homes in Strokestown, County Roscommon, currently stands empty. That is a residential vacancy rate approaching 15%, among the highest recorded for a town of its size anywhere in Ireland. Walk along the commercial stretch of the town's famously wide main street, one of the broadest in the country, built deliberately grand in the 18th century by the Marn family who owned the surrounding estate, and the emptiness gets sharper. Depending on which survey you consult, vacancy among shopfronts in the town centre runs somewhere between 35 and 40%. Shuttered windows along a street engineered 200 years ago to impress visitors arriving towards Strokestown Park house at its head, a street so wide it was reportedly designed so the lady of the house could turn a carriage without reversing. That house itself carries its own dark weight in this story. Strokestown Park is home to Ireland's National Famine Museum, and the estate's own history includes the assassination of landlord Major Dennis Marn in 1847, shot dead after evicting thousands of tenants during the famine to clear his land for grazing, one of the most documented and notorious landlord killings of that entire period. An event that made international news at the time and remains a case study in famine-era land politics. The museum today houses the estate's original eviction ledgers, listing tenant names one after another in careful clerical handwriting, a physical record of the exact kind of depopulation this region has been experiencing in one form or another for nearly 2 centuries. Strokestown's current vacancy problem is not a new phenomenon arriving out of nowhere. It is the latest chapter of a story this specific patch of Roscommon has been writing since the 1840s, when the town's population was reduced by roughly a third within a handful of years. That is the modern story of Strokestown, and it is a real and current problem with real consequences for the people still living there. But 3 kilometres east, along the shore of Lough Ree, sits a story that makes Strokestown's current vacancy look almost recent by comparison. There is a ghost city out there, and it has been empty for roughly 700 years. It is called Rindoon, and almost nobody outside Roscommon has heard of it. Rindoon was founded in 1227 by the Anglo-Norman Justiciar of Ireland as a fortified frontier town, deliberately positioned on a peninsula jutting into Lough Ree to control the crossing point between Connaught and the rest of the country, a strategic choke point that made whoever controlled it effectively the gatekeeper of the western frontier. The Normans built it the way they built everything meant to project power and permanence. A stone castle anchored the settlement, its walls still standing today in fragments substantial enough to walk through. The arrow-slit windows still visible in the remaining masonry, positioned to command a clear line of sight across the water in every direction. A defensive wall roughly 2 kilometres long enclosed the town, cutting the peninsula off from the mainland and creating a controlled, fortified space inside, one of the longest surviving town wall circuits from this period anywhere in Ireland. A harbour gave the settlement direct access to the lake, allowing goods and reinforcements to move without depending entirely on the road network through contested territory. Excavated remains also point to a hospital run by the Knights Hospitaller, a parish church, and the kind of infrastructure a medieval planner would build only for a settlement intended to last generations, not decades. At its height in the 13th century, Rindoon supported a population of roughly 1,000 people. That figure deserves context most viewers will not have, because 1,000 residents inside fortified stone walls on the Irish frontier in the 1200s was genuinely substantial. Most Anglo-Norman frontier settlements in Ireland during this period struggled to hold even a few hundred people, caught as they were between the practical difficulty of provisioning a walled town far from the main centres of Norman power in Dublin, and the constant military pressure of neighbouring Gaelic lordships who had never accepted the legitimacy of the new arrivals in the first place. 1,000 people at Rindoon meant the settlement was functioning as intended, a genuine fortified town rather than a glorified garrison outpost, complete with markets, craft workshops, and the kind of daily commercial life archaeologists can still trace through pottery fragments, coin finds, and animal bone deposits recovered during excavation seasons, carried out over the past several decades by teams working with University College Dublin. It did not last. The precise sequence of Rindoon's decline is pieced together from fragmentary historical records rather than a single documented collapse. But the broad pattern is clear enough. Norman control across Connaught weakened significantly through the 1300s. Worn down by resurgent Gaelic Irish lordships reclaiming territory the Normans had never fully secured, and further destabilised by the Bruce invasion of Ireland in 1315. When Edward Bruce's Scottish forces swept through parts of the country and shattered the fragile balance of power that had allowed frontier settlements like Rindoon to function at all. Repeated Gaelic raids on the town are recorded through this period, each one further undermining the confidence of settlers who had originally arrived believing Norman control of the region was permanent. Some historical accounts also point to the mid-14th century arrival of plague across Ireland as a compounding pressure on a settlement already struggling to maintain its population under military threat. By some point in the 14th century, the town that had housed 1,000 people simply stopped being maintained as a functioning settlement. The walls remained. The castle remained, slowly losing its roof and its purpose. The people did not. Here is where the two stories, 7 centuries apart, start to rhyme in a way that is genuinely uncomfortable to sit with. Rindoon was built by outside power, sustained by outside investment and military protection, and abandoned the moment that outside support became too expensive or too dangerous to maintain against local economic and political reality. Strokestown, in its own much more recent way, tells a similar structural story. The town's grand main street and its planned formal layout were themselves the product of an 18th century estate landlord's vision, imposed from above rather than grown organically from local trade. And the same estate system that built that impressive street also produced the eviction crisis that scarred the region during the famine less than a century later. When the economic model underneath a place depends on decisions made elsewhere, whether by a medieval justiciar in Dublin Castle, an 18th century landlord managing rents from a distance, or a modern retail chain deciding which towns still justify a branch, that place remains structurally vulnerable to abandonment in a way that organically grown settlements sometimes are not. That is not a coincidence specific to these two sites. It is close to the defining pattern of this stretch of the Irish Midlands and West, a landscape that has repeatedly been built up by outside power and outside capital, and repeatedly hollowed out again when that support withdrew. From Norman frontier towns in the 1300s, to Famine-era clearances in the 1840s, to 20th century emigration, to the retail and commercial pressures reshaping small Irish towns right now. Rindoon today is quiet in the specific way that only a genuinely empty, genuinely old place can be quiet. Sheep graze inside the old town walls. The castle stands roofless against the sky over Lough Ree, its stone softened at the edges by 700 years of weather. Lichen spreading slowly across surfaces that once held plaster and paint. The silence broken only by the occasional call of a curlew across the water. Archaeologists have surveyed the site extensively, using geophysical techniques that reveal building foundations still buried beneath the grass without a single spade being lifted, and it remains one of the best preserved deserted medieval settlements in Ireland, precisely because so little has been built over it since. Nobody had the economic reason to return, which is exactly why it survives so completely today as a kind of accidental time capsule that a busier stretch of coastline would never have preserved. Strokestown's 15% residential vacancy and near 40% commercial vacancy are not 700 years in the making. They reflect a much more immediate set of pressures: retail consolidation, rural depopulation, and the pull of larger regional towns nearby, like Roscommon town and Longford, both offering more retail choice and more employment within a short drive. But standing on that wide main street and looking 3 kilometres toward a walled medieval town that housed 1,000 people and now houses none, it becomes difficult not to wonder whether Strokestown's current struggle is simply the newest chapter in a pattern this particular corner of Roscommon has been quietly repeating for the better part of 8 centuries. Whether that pattern breaks depends on the same unglamorous factors it has always depended on. Jobs anchored locally rather than decided elsewhere. Investment that outlasts the political or economic moment that created it. A reason for people to stay that does not depend entirely on someone else's decision made somewhere far away. Rindoon never got that reason back. Whether Strokestown does remains, right now, genuinely undecided. If you found this look at Ireland's layered history of abandonment interesting, please subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who loves Irish history. Let us know in the comments if you visited Rindoon and whether you think Strokestown's story will end differently.